and welcome to the Carlisle Connection podcast. This is our special series about the annual town meeting warrant and the town meeting process, but today we're going to do something different. Wayne, why don't you tell us what we're going to talk about?
Sure. Thank you, Ryan. So I'm Wayne Davis. I am the town moderator, and to my left here is our town clerk, Ashley Cote.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you for being here. What we'd like to talk about today is sort of an introduction to town meeting. Our audience in particular today, if you are new to town or maybe you've just turned 18, freshly registered, you may have grown up in town but not attended town meeting, or maybe you've moved to Carlisle a couple of years ago but have never attended a town meeting. This is for you to try to give you an introduction, what to expect, how to participate, and so forth. But also, if you've been around town but haven't been coming to town meeting in the last 8 or 10 years, we'd love to have you back. So this will maybe a little bit of a refresher for you. So what we'll talk about is what is town meeting, why might you be interested in attending, what to expect, and then really how to participate. So let me start by just explaining the concept of town meeting, because it's often a strange, weird concept if you didn't grow up in a New England town. I know I certainly didn't. I went to law school and I came out to Carlisle and I said, what the heck is this? So here's the way it works. If you think about the federal government and your high school civics class, we're all familiar with our government having 3 branches, the executive, legislative, and judicial. Well, in the state of Massachusetts, the judiciary, that's all at the state level. There's no local judiciary. But in terms of the executive and legislative branches, whether you're living in a city, which are the larger municipalities, or a town, you have the executive and the legislature. And the legislature in towns is called town meeting. And what that is it's kind of like Congress or Beacon Hill here in Massachusetts. We come together as a legislature, except it's not an elected legislator, you're a citizen legislator. So if you're registered to vote in town, you come to town meeting. We have an annual town meeting every spring. Sometimes we have special town meetings at other times of the year. You're coming and you're sitting as a legislator. You're going to vote on the major policy issues, in effect setting the laws and the major policies for how the town runs and making the major financial decisions on behalf of the town. So that's what town meeting is. Now, I mentioned that you have to be a citizen and a registered voter, but let me turn it over to our town clerk and Ashley and ask you to explain what people need to do to qualify and how they might participate in town meeting.
Thank you, Wayne. Yes, so to participate fully in town meeting, you do need to be a registered voter in town. The voter registration deadline for this particular upcoming meeting in 2026 is going to be May 8th, but typically it's about 10 days before the event. If you are already registered in town, you don't need to re-register. And if you're unsure whether or not you're registered in town, you can always check your voter registration status. You can do this online at the Secretary of Commonwealth's website, or you can call or email the town clerk's office, and I'll check it out and let you know if you're registered to vote. So you do have to be a fully registered voter in order to fully participate in town meeting. However, if you're not registered to vote, you can still attend the town meeting. Non-voters they sign in on a separate list, and they're not provided with the clicker to vote, and they're also seated separately. However, you can still address the town meeting. You just need permission from the moderator. So if you are not a registered voter and you anticipate that you'd like to speak to a topic at town meeting, simply reach out to the moderator ahead of time to let him know. So now that we've covered how to fully participate, Ryan, would you like to go over some of the typical topics that are covered?
Sure. So as our moderator, Wayne, was talking about, many of the functions of government can't happen without the legislature executing certain things. And the most famous or the most important of them are our financial appropriations. So we can't spend money as a town here in Massachusetts until town meeting approves it. So we work through a budget process all year. We come up with small capital items and large capital items, things that we've been considering for a long time, and then those are presented to town meeting. Without that town meeting approval, that expenditure can't happen. And the most famous one is the budget. So the thing we have to absolutely pass at any town meeting is the annual budget. If you don't pass one by July 1, then you don't have an operating budget to exist. And many people are familiar with governments that happen that way. Local government works sometimes a little bit better than federal government in that sense, but we have to have a budget by July 1st. Additionally, the town often asks voters to support capital items. These are police cruisers, items that departments need to function, voting machines for our town clerk. These things often exist as one-time purchases, maybe every few years, and those come up as a capital item or a small capital item that they're asked to approve. Here in Carlisle, there's a split between equipment and building, just because we have a committee that functions as a oversight of facilities, so that comes up. And then you have your long-term capital projects, which are the things like buildings and significant investments with multiple year investments. Those come up for consideration. And this year at town meeting in 2026, we do have a couple big capital items: design for a new DPW building and construction for the fire station. So if you're listening to this or watching this 20 years from now, then right now is when that building started or the appropriation happened, which is pretty cool. It's a cool part of New England government. And then there are a lot of small but important actions that are required for us to do the business of the government. And one great example is Chapter 90. Chapter 90 is money the state gives us. It is restricted to use for road maintenance, paving, culverts, that type of thing. If town meeting doesn't approve that expenditure explicitly or give that to the select board, then they can't execute the year's paving plan. They would have to come to town meeting and ask for money for every single road. So some of these items are for efficiencies and for us to just function as a town. There's a ton of other different articles that are covered, but those are the main ones.
So mainly you've been talking about the financial ones. Maybe if you could just talk about some of the ones that are sort of policy rules and regulation, like zoning, planning board, conservation. How do those major policy decisions, how do those come to town meeting?
Sure. So it depends on who's proposing the particular amendment. So there's general bylaws and there's zoning bylaws, and each one has different rules and different processes that have to be followed amongst the town's boards and committees to get to town meeting appropriately. And the reason for that is if you're proposing a major zoning change, the state law allows for a process that citizens can participate in order to help shape and influence that process. And then it would come to town meeting for a vote, and it often requires more than just a majority vote, a 3/4 vote, especially for zoning. And here you would be presented with why the change is needed, what are the impacts of it, and typically with zoning there is lengthy debate unless it's relatively a minor adjustment.
Right. So if we think about it, and again, we're in this legislative function. So things like the rules around wetlands. Again, if you're relatively new to town and you say, oh, I want to cut down these trees or I want to do this construction and what do I need to do? And all of a sudden you discover, oh, we have something called wetlands regulations. What are those rules? How far can I be from the lot line? All of those things are actually determined locally here in Massachusetts. So from time to time, issues about amending those rules will come to town meeting. So that's what we're talking about here. So those are often important and can sometimes be contentious. So those are some of those policy issues that come to town. Now, Ryan, you've been the town administrator here in Carlisle, and you've worked in other towns in Massachusetts. I'm just curious, there's sometimes some offbeat or atypical articles. Can you think of what are one or two of your favorite ones that have come up over the years at town meeting votes?
Well, typically the most interesting articles are citizens petitions, and it's not necessarily because a citizen's proposing it. It's because there's a lot of rules that shape how articles need to come to town meeting and a lot of specifics about it that citizens may or may not understand, because as this profession professionalizes more and more, it becomes harder and harder to interpret local law and state law. So the citizens petitions are often the ones that they come to town meeting and I wouldn't say confusing, but it's difficult for voters to understand that we're going to talk about this topic and it's a really controversial topic and it's heated, but we may not have any action come from it and it might not decide anything. So in those cases, town meeting voters are typically really confused because they go with an opinion and a strong opinion, and that's what makes New England great, and they express it and then nothing happens, right? So those are some of my favorite. We have one this year about personal property tax, and although I don't expect it to be controversial at town meeting, the discussion leading up to it has given it the nickname of the chicken tax, and this is because there's a small personal property tax for anyone that owns chickens, and that bill can honestly be less than the cost of the postage that sends it. So the Board of Assessors did a great job coming up with a exemption of $5,000 or less, which allows people to have chickens. It was a great piece of local government work. They solved the problem. But I thought that the assessor, our assessor Brian, should come up to the podium in a chicken outfit and present this. I thought it would bring some levity to town meeting.
That might have been good.
Yeah, but he refused, and so did Kelly, and the select board won't let me, so you're not gonna get to see a chicken.
Well, that'll be very disappointing. But yeah, actually, that is one of the, it's either interesting or aggravating, depending on your sense of humor. If all the processes have run really well, the finance committee and all the department heads and the select board, everyone has been working hard for months on the budget. All the issues get worked out in advance, come to town meeting, and we have the presentation, 5 minutes of discussion, and we pass a $30 to $40 million budget. And then something will come up that the financial consequences are under $10,000, and we'll spend 20 minutes debating it just because.
Or just the language of
There'll
a
be
sentence,
some-
or
So that's either part of the charm or the aggravation of town meeting.
one of the most interesting comments I got once was, we ran a town meeting, it was under an hour, 20 articles, which as a moderator, is quick.
That's very quick.
And I was very proud of our staff and the work we did. To me, it meant that everybody was doing what they were supposed to, and all the information was presented, and people knew what they were talking about, and it was very efficient. And I got more comments after that town meeting about how it was boring, it went too fast, and it was too buttoned up, and people wanted more controversy and more discussion. So I've learned that efficient isn't always best at town meetings. Sometimes you just got to talk it out.
That's right. And, it was only just a few years ago that we retired the wooden box, hand crank ballot box that we used here in Carlisle. So maybe we should just moving on a little bit. I do want to just mention, since Ryan raised about citizen petitions, that actually is one of the hallmarks of the New England town meeting. And, there's this old saying, well, you can't tell City Hall what to do, That's not true in Massachusetts. You are the government, and any citizen for an annual town meeting, it's just 10 signatures. There are rules for how to do it, and we publish that online and so forth. But if there is an issue that you care about, and the first thing you ought to do is come to whatever board or committee, whether it's the planning board, the select board, conservation commission, whatever. You come to the body of the government that is supposed to be responsible for that. And you try to convince them, yes, you ought to do something. But if they say, nah, we're not interested or whatever, you still have the right as a citizen to say, well, I believe in this issue. I want to do something. You figure out what you want to do. The clerk will advise you on some of the formalities. I'm available to advise you to help you get it in proper shape. I can't tell you what to do, and I'm not going to tell you whether it's a good or bad idea, but I'll help you get it into a form so that if you truly want to bring something to the voters, you can. You collect 10 signatures, and then the select board has to put it on the annual town meeting warrant. So that's a really important check on government, and I think, don't like to see a lot of those for a variety of reasons, but it's an important safety valve, and so that's a really key thing about town meeting. And that actually provides a nice opportunity for me to talk about something that I really care a lot about, and that's the question: why should I attend town meeting? Particularly if I look at the warrant and I say, okay, yeah, it all looks fairly routine. Why should I even show up? And that there are a couple of reasons. One is, just what Ryan was talking about. There are a bunch of really important fundamental issues that come up. And while you may think that you know everything about it, always there are surprises and new things come up on the floor of town meeting. And it gives you an opportunity to actually have a say in the decision making. That's kind of the most fundamental thing. But other things, it's a great way to keep tabs on how your government is functioning and how your tax dollars are being spent. Do you know what the size of our budget is? Do you know how much is going to the schools? How much to the police, relatively speaking? How much are we spending on, name the topic, special education, police cruisers, the transfer station? Do you care? Or maybe not, but if you'd like to keep tabs, even if you feel like Carlisle town government is functioning pretty well, how would you know? You need to check in every now and then, at least I believe that. But those are sort of more good citizen things. Now let me just pivot to, suppose if you're just a little more self-interested. And you don't actually have to be self-interested or selfish. It's important to learn the ins and outs of how our town functions. The time will come when, you need to do some construction, you want to pull a construction permit, or you need to do renovations. You've got some in-laws are moving in, you want to have an in-law apartment, maybe a child is on the way and you need to do some renovation, whatever. It's really helpful when you walk into town hall, you're actually familiar with some of the people because you've seen them making presentations at town meeting. You kind of know who the players are. Or maybe there's an issue that has come up that has gotten your attention and that will be coming to the town meeting a couple weeks or a month from now. And you'd like to have your say, and you feel really passionate about that issue. And you want to influence your fellow citizens, how they're going to vote. If you've never been to a town meeting, you are not going to be effective unless you're really lucky or you've done a lot of homework. If you've been to a couple of town meetings and have a sense of how they work, how they flow, what sorts of arguments tend to persuade other people, what things get ignored, your chances of actually accomplishing whatever your goals are a whole lot better. And I would think that for most residents of Carlisle who are here, typically at least 10 years, but many people 20, 30 or more years, there will inevitably be a couple of issues, even if you're not normally someone who goes to town meeting, where you really will want to show up at town meeting. And believe me, when you show up for those issues, if you have some sense and understanding of how things work, you will feel grateful that you invested some time in going to town meetings earlier in your life. So those are my arguments, and I do hope that people will just try out town meeting and get to know how the town works. So, Ryan, you were talking earlier sort of generally about the types of topics, but one of the things is for each particular meeting, we have a specific agenda, which for a variety of reasons we call the warrant. How do people find out what's on the warrant for an upcoming town meeting? Not only what's on the warrant, but sort of like what's behind it.
Yeah, so the warrant's really important to me. I've spent about a month of my life on it right now.
That's
so
right.
I know it inside and out, but one of the comments we don't like is when residents say to us, "Oh, I didn't know where that was, or I couldn't find it." So we're going to try very hard, or we have been trying very hard to push this information out. So email, news blasts. The Mosquito does a great job covering it. But also we're doing this, which is videos and podcasts and other things, pointing you to our town meeting website where all the information for every article is, to include the warrant itself. And as you described, the warrant is an advertisement of what's coming, but each one of the articles is its own story, has had its own debate for several months, has had many videos and meetings about it. So we're going to try to link as much documentation to each article as possible so people can dig in as much as they want or as little as they want. So the warrant itself has a summary, which is intended to answer okay, I just read this warrant article, what does that mean? And if that's all you need, then the warrant is perfectly done for you, and the summary is there. If you really want to dig into the minutia of how the budget was created or where everything's going, to as much detail as you want, you can get that on our town meeting website. And all these other things are designed to get you to that information source so you can make an informed decision.
Yeah, and let me just give a big shout out to Ryan and the staff at Town Hall, because really in the last 5 years, we've gone from, I would say, fairly minimal transparency to, as I check in with other moderators and other town practice, we're amongst the leaders, I think, in getting information out through the town meeting. There's a web page, so we've got these podcasts and other information. And in addition, at the level of the boards and committees, and actually our planning board is especially good at this, our planning administrator, getting information posted online so that if you really want to dig into the minutia, you can, and really educate yourself about the issues. And for a town our size, we're now one of the leaders in the Commonwealth in that level of transparency. So I'm proud of that, and I thank you and everyone else who's really contributed to that.
Well, thank you. We know some people don't want to read things. They want to listen to them. So every one of the articles has its own podcast. They range from 60 seconds to 30 minutes, and they're all professionally produced by Tori and the staff. I like waving to her during these, even though you can't see her. She's there. And the team does a great job packaging it so that it's digestible.
Yeah. So let me ask Ashley, and this will be our last question. So suppose a voter needs some sort of assistance around being able to fully participate in town meeting. What are the options available, and how do people access them?
It's a great question. So the town of Carlisle is committed to hosting accessible town meetings and making reasonable accommodations wherever possible. So if there are any accommodations that you anticipate needing, please reach out to either the moderator or I, and we can address that. Some things we already have built in. At check-in, we have some assistive listening devices. These are programmed to accentuate, the sound while drowning out some background noise. This can help for folks who may have some hearing issues. We also do have Braille clickers. All of our clickers at town meeting, I'm sure if you're familiar with voting electronically. We've been doing that for a few years now. One of the advantages to that is we also have Braille clickers. These Braille clickers have raised dots on the buttons so that a voter with a visual impairment can discern between the buttons and vote independently still. We also, as far as getting to town meeting, we do have the remote location at Benfield, so folks can feel free to join there if they live at Benfield or if it's easier to get to Benfield. We also do have the COA vans that are able to provide transportation if transportation is an issue. And other accommodations can be made depending on what the need is. So just like I said, if you have any anticipated needs, just reach out to Wayne or myself, and we'll be happy to discuss that and make some accommodations as we can.
Yeah. So one thing that's probably very specific, worth mentioning on this, a lot of times people ask, well, why can't I just participate via Zoom and vote like that way? And there are two answers to that. First, if you truly have a disability that would be recognized under the ADA, so for example, we've had people who are bedbound, medical condition or what have you. Under those circumstances, we can and have, and we were actually in Carlisle here, we were some of the first people in the state to do this. We are legally not only allowed, but I would argue we're obliged to make participation via, we do it through a secure Zoom link. We do that if needed as an ADA accommodation. The no part of the answer is If you're out of town on a business trip or something like that, that's not an ADA accommodation, and it's not actually legally permitted under Commonwealth of Massachusetts law. So we can't do that, but we certainly can as an ADA accommodation. And with that, all I would say in conclusion here is, if you have any further questions, usually contacting the clerk's office directly on sort of the formalities of voter registration, on citizen petitions and things like that. If it's more about the process of what's going to happen and how do you do certain things, so for example, if you're thinking about that you want to introduce an amendment or something like that, we have resources online at the town website. There's a town meeting page, has a lot of information posted, or you can shoot me an email or pick up the phone and call me. I still answer my phone, at least my cell phone I do. So we can help out that way. And we're recording this in spring of 2026. For the first time, I'm going to hold sort of office hours a couple of weeks before the annual town meeting, I believe 2 weeks. And it's just, I'll do maybe 2 sessions, one in the daytime, one in the evening, for people just to stop by and ask me questions about the upcoming town meeting and how they can participate. And I hope that for future town meetings, if there's demand for that, I'll continue that practice. With that, I thank our guests, Ashley and Ryan. Thank you for a most informative discussion, and I look forward to seeing everyone at the next town meeting.